The reflection wasn't his own. It couldn't be. The face staring back from the polished black granite of the lobby wall was a ghost, a hollowed-out effigy of the man who had, only yesterday, been called a visionary. His name was Kalen, and that name, once a synonym for architectural genius, was now a curse whispered in the corridors of power, a punchline in late-night news cycles. The air still tasted of champagne and triumph from the gala just 24 hours ago, a cruel phantom sweetness now soured by the metallic tang of absolute ruin. He had stood on a stage, bathed in light, accepting an award for a building that was meant to redefine the skyline, a titan of glass and steel called the Zenith. It was his magnum opus, a structure so ambitious it was said to have been dreamt rather than designed. And now, that dream was a global nightmare. It hadn't collapsed. No, that would have been too simple, too clean a death. The failure was more insidious, a flaw woven into its very soul. A resonant frequency, a miscalculation in the harmonic dampening systems, so subtle it was missed by every simulation, every stress test. But it was discovered. A rival firm, hungry for his throne, had found the crack in his armor. They hadn't exposed it to a safety committee. They had leaked it to the world. They painted a picture of a ticking time bomb, a beautiful glass coffin that could, under the right seismic conditions, shatter into a million pieces. The panic was instantaneous. The evacuation was a media spectacle. The Zenith, his monument to human achievement, stood empty, a glittering pariah against the sky. It was not a ruin of rubble and dust, but a ruin of reputation, of trust, of a future that had been his for the taking. His phone hadn't stopped vibrating, a relentless tremor in his pocket. Each buzz was a fresh wave of condemnation, another severed tie, another investor pulling out, another friend feigning sympathy while secretly dancing on his grave. He had silenced it an hour ago, but he could still feel its phantom rattle, a ghost of the life that was now convulsing in its death throes. He had come back here, to the lobby of his greatest failure, because he didn't know where else to go. His apartment felt like a stranger's home. His office was a morgue. Here, in the shadow of his own hubris, was the only place that felt honest. A security guard, a young man who had once looked at him with awe, now refused to meet his eyes. The silence in the cavernous space was louder than any scream. It was the sound of his own insignificance. Every polished surface, every perfectly aligned tile, every beam of engineered light was a testament to his former glory and a mockery of his present state. He had built a temple to the future, and in doing so, had bulldozed his own. This is what they don't tell you about success. They don't tell you that the higher you climb, the thinner the air gets and the more catastrophic the fall. They sell you the dream of the view from the top, but they neglect to mention the abyss that surrounds it. You are told to build your legacy, stone by stone. But what happens when the cornerstone cracks? What happens when the very foundation of who you are turns to sand? Do you crumble with it? Do you become just another piece of the wreckage? Or do you find a new blueprint? This is not a story about architecture. It is a story about the blueprint of the mind. It's about what happens when the structure you've built your entire identity upon is condemned, and you are left standing in the ruins, with nothing but the dust of your own failure for company. It is about the covenant you must make with yourself in that moment of absolute desolation, a promise not to rebuild what was lost, but to build something new, something stronger. Something that cannot be shaken by the earthquakes of fortune or the storms of public opinion. Something unbreakable. For in the ruins of our greatest failures, we are given a choice. We can be buried by the debris, or we can salvage the stones. We can mourn the ghost of what we were, or we can become the architect of what we will be. What choice will you make when your zenith comes crashing down? The question is not if it will happen. The question is, will you be ready? Will you have the tools, not to prevent the collapse, but to build from its rubble? Kalen traced a line in the condensation his breath left on the cold granite. He saw the blueprint of the zenith in his mind's eye, a complex filigree of lines and calculations that had once felt like divine inspiration. Now, it looked like a map of his own folly. The arrogance was there in every soaring line, every impossible cantilever. He had wanted to touch the heavens, and in his haste, he had neglected the earth beneath his feet. He had focused so intently on the pinnacle that he had forgotten the foundation. Not the physical foundation of concrete and steel, but the inner foundation. The foundation of character, of humility, of a mind prepared for the inevitable chaos of existence. He had believed the hype, his own hype. He thought he was a master of the universe because he could bend steel to his will. He mistook control over materials for control over reality. He was a god in his own private cosmos of blueprints and scale models. But the real world, the world of jealous rivals, of unforeseen variables, of cosmic indifference, had delivered its verdict. He was not a god. He was a man, a failed man. And in that moment, in the echoing silence of his glass mausoleum, a new thought, a terrifying and liberating thought, began to form. What if this wasn't an ending? What if this was a groundbreaking ceremony of a different kind? The demolition of a faulty structure to make way for a new one. The complete and utter destruction of Kalen the visionary, the golden boy, the celebrated architect, was perhaps the necessary first step to building just Kalen. Not a title, not a reputation, a man. A man with a mind forged, not in the gentle heat of praise, but in the white-hot fire of failure. He closed his eyes. The phantom vibrations in his pocket ceased. The mocking headlines faded. The whispers of his enemies fell silent. All that was left was the cold granite beneath his fingertips and the ruins of his life around him. And for the first time in a very long time, he felt the thrill of an empty plot of land, the terrifying, exhilarating promise of a new design. He had spent his life building structures that could withstand the forces of nature. Now he had to build a mind that could withstand the nature of life itself. He had to draw a new blueprint not on paper but on his own soul. He had to make a covenant with himself, a solemn vow whispered in the heart of his own colossal failure. He would not just survive this. He would build from it. He would use the rubble to forge a foundation so deep and so solid that no storm could ever shake it again. The architect's covenant had begun. The world expects you to break. When you fall from a great height, they gather not to help you up but to watch the impact, to see the splatter. They expect the wailing, the excuses, the pointing of fingers. They expect you to become a ghost, haunting the memory of your own past success. Your weakness is their entertainment, a cautionary tale they tell their children to feel better about their own mediocrity. And for a week, Kalen gave them exactly what they wanted. He sealed himself away in his minimalist apartment, a space he had designed to be a sanctuary of order and control. Now it was a prison of his own making. The clean lines and uncluttered surfaces seemed to mock his chaotic inner world. He drank. He stared at the walls. He replayed every decision, every calculation, every moment of hubris that had led him to this point. He scrolled through the articles, the memes, the brutal online dissections of his downfall. He bathed in the acid of public scorn, letting it strip him down to the bone. He was performing the ritual of self-flagellation that society demands of its failures. He was showing the world that he was broken, that he understood his place, that he had been humbled. But underneath the haze of alcohol and despair, a cold, hard ember of defiance began to glow. It was a feeling he hadn't felt since he was a young man, a hungry kid from the wrong side of the tracks trying to claw his way into a world that wanted him out. It was rage. Not the hot, explosive rage that lashes out, but a cold, dense rage. A rage directed not at his rivals, not at the media, but at his own weakness. He was enraged by his own pathetic performance. He was disgusted by the man who drowned his sorrow in expensive whiskey while the world celebrated his demise. He was furious at the part of himself that was so easily shattered by the opinions of others. Who were they, these anonymous judges, these armchair critics? Had they ever dared to build something? Had they ever risked public failure for a shot at greatness? No, they were scavengers, feasting on the carcasses of fallen lions, and he had been serving himself up to them on a silver platter. The ember of rage ignited a thought. The thought ignited a question. What if the blueprint wasn't the problem? The Zenith was a masterpiece of design, flawed, yes, but brilliant in its ambition. The problem wasn't the steel or the glass. The problem was the architect, the man. He was the weak material. His ego was the faulty foundation. His need for external validation was the resonant frequency that had caused the entire structure of his life to vibrate until it threatened to shatter. He remembered a story his grandfather used to tell him, a man who had worked with his hands, a stonemason who saw the world in terms of pressure and breaking points. He spoke of an ancient Japanese art called kintsugi, where broken pottery was repaired with lacquer mixed with powdered gold. The philosophy was that the object was more beautiful for having been broken. The cracks were not something to hide. They were a part of its history, a testament to its resilience. The world wanted him to sweep his broken pieces under the rug, to disappear in shame. But what if he could do the opposite? What if he could gather the shards of his shattered reputation, his broken ego, his failed dream, and piece them back together not with shame, but with gold? What if his failure wasn't the end of his story, but the defining feature that made it beautiful, that made it strong? This was the first glimmer of the new blueprint, the first principle of the architect's covenant. Failure is not the end of the structure. It is the material for a stronger foundation. You do not hide the cracks in your life. You fill them with gold. You make the point of your greatest weakness the source of your greatest strength. But how? It was a beautiful idea, a poetic philosophy, but how did one actually do it? How do you find the gold? He knew he couldn't find the answer in his glass tower apartment, surrounded by the ghosts of his former self. He needed a different kind of teacher, not a professor from a prestigious university or a celebrated design guru. He needed a stonemason. He needed someone who understood what it meant to work with broken things, with raw, unyielding material. He thought of a name he hadn't heard in years, a whisper, a legend in the architecture world, Silas, a man who had been on a trajectory even more brilliant than Kaelan's 2 decades ago. He had designed the revolutionary Triton Tower, a building that was supposed to have changed everything. And then disaster, a genuine catastrophic failure during construction. Lives were lost. Silas's career was not just ended, it was obliterated. He vanished. Some said he had taken his own life. Others said he lived in seclusion, a hermit haunted by his failure. Kaelan had always dismissed the story as a cautionary tale. Now, he saw it as a pilgrimage. He had to find Silas. He had to find the man who had fallen from a greater height and had, somehow, survived. He didn't know what he would ask him. He only knew that he had to stand before a man who had lived in the ruins for 20 years and see what kind of structure he had built from them. The search was an exercise in humility. He had to call in old favors, speak to people who now pitied him, chasing the ghost of a forgotten man. He sold his expensive car, a symbol of the life he was leaving behind, and used the cash to fund his search. He traded his designer suits for rugged clothes. He was shedding the skin of the celebrity architect, layer by painful layer. The journey took him away from the polished cities and into the rugged, forgotten parts of the country. He followed a trail of whispers to a remote, windswept coastline, a place where the land met the sea with brutal force. He found him living in a small stone house he had built with his own hands, perched on a cliff overlooking the violent ocean. The house was a masterpiece of simplicity and strength, designed to withstand the relentless assault of the wind and waves. It was everything the Zenith was not. It was humble, it was functional, it was unbreakable. Silas was an old man, his face a roadmap of harsh lessons and his hands calloused and strong. He looked at Kaelin with eyes that held no pity, only a deep, unnerving understanding. "I know who you are," Silas said, his voice like rocks grinding together. "You're the boy who tried to build a glass needle to prick the ego of God. I saw it on the news. They're having a fine time tearing you apart." Kaelin felt a flash of the old, defensive pride. It was a sound design. "Every faulty design is sound in the mind of its creator," Silas countered, turning back to a piece of driftwood he was carving. "That's the trap. You fall in love with the blueprint. You forget that the blueprint is a lie, a fantasy. Reality is the wind and the rain and the unseen crack in the stone. You didn't fail because your math was wrong. You failed because you thought your math was truth." "I came here to learn," Kaelin said, his voice raw, "to understand how you survived." Silas stopped carving and looked at Kaelin, a long, appraising stare. "Survived? Boy, you think this is about survival. Survival is for animals. This is about building. You think my life ended when the Triton Tower fell. You think this house is a hermit's cave. You are blind. My life didn't end that day. It began. That failure was the single most important event of my life. It was the demolition I needed. It cleared the site for a real project." "What project?" Kaelin asked. Silas tapped his own chest with a thick finger. "This one. The only one that matters. The world can take your buildings. They can take your name. They can take your fortune. But this," he tapped his chest again, "this inner structure they cannot touch. Not if you build it right. You came here to learn how to fix your career. I have no lessons for you on that. But if you came here to learn how to build a mind that is stronger than any stone, more resilient than any steel, then perhaps your journey wasn't a waste." "What's the first step?" Kaelin asked, the desperation clear in his voice. Silas picked up a broken piece of stone from the ground. It was jagged and useless. "The first step is to stop seeing this as a mistake," he said, holding the stone. "You are standing in the rubble of your life, cursing the broken stones. You are whining that your quarry delivered faulty material. You are blaming the storm. Your first lesson is this: there is no faulty material. There is no storm to blame. There is only the material you have been given. Your failure is not a broken stone. It is the cornerstone of your new foundation. But you cannot build with it until you accept it, until you stop wishing it were smooth and perfect and whole. You must learn to love the jagged edges. You must learn to love the ruin." This was the first lesson in the architect's covenant. It was not a lesson in design or engineering. It was a lesson in perception. The world tells you that your failures are scars to be hidden, but the covenant demands that you see them as the defining lines of a new and more powerful blueprint. The ruin is not the end. The ruin is the beginning. And the first act of building an unbreakable mind is to fall in love with the rubble. You must pick up the heaviest, most jagged piece of your failure, the piece that cut you the deepest, and you must look at it and say, "This is the stone I will build upon." This isn't just a metaphor. Think about your life. Think about that failure you cannot forget, the business that collapsed, the relationship that ended in betrayal, the opportunity you fumbled. You carry it like a heavy, misshapen weight. You try to hide it. You build the rest of your life around it, trying to pretend it isn't there. But its gravity warps everything you do. It's a source of shame, of weakness. The first principle, the first radical act of defiance against a world that loves to watch you fail, is to stop hiding it. It is to embrace it. This is the Stoic concept of amor fati, a love of one's fate. Not a passive acceptance, but an active, enthusiastic embracing of everything that happens, good or bad. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, wrote, The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Your failure is the impediment. Therefore, it must become the way. How? By deconstructing it, by looking at it not as a monolithic catastrophe but as a collection of data. Silas did not allow Kalen to wallow in self-pity. He made him work. He gave him a hammer and a chisel and set him to the task of breaking down the fallen rocks on the cliffside. "Every day," Silas commanded, "you will come out here and you will break these rocks. And with every swing of the hammer, I want you to name a piece of your failure." At first, Kalen resisted. It felt pointless, brutish, but he was desperate, so he obeyed. The first swing was for his arrogance. The hammer struck the stone and a chip flew off. The second swing was for his vanity. The third for his need for applause. He swung the hammer for hours, his muscles screaming, his hands blistering. He named every sycophant he had trusted, every warning he had ignored, every shortcut he had taken in his own character development. He was not just breaking rocks. He was breaking down the emotional charge of his failure. He was separating the event itself from the story of shame he had wrapped around it. The failure was a single event in time. The shame was a story he was telling himself over and over. And with every swing, the story grew weaker. The raw, physical exhaustion was purifying him, burning away the fog of self-pity. Days turned into weeks. His body changed. The soft hands of a designer became the calloused claws of a laborer. The slump of defeat in his shoulders was replaced by the solid posture of a man who swung a heavy hammer all day. And his mind changed. He stopped seeing a catastrophic failure. He started seeing a series of discrete events, decisions, and consequences. He was performing a mental autopsy on his own downfall with a cold, detached precision. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Silas spoke. "You see the difference now. When you first came here, your failure was a monster, a single, terrifying beast that had devoured your life. Now you have broken it down. You see its component parts. You see that it was not a monster but a machine of your own making. And any machine that can be made can be understood. And any machine that can be understood can be used. This is the practical application. Take your greatest failure, the thing that haunts you. Write it down. Not the story, not the emotions, just the facts, the sequence of events, the decisions you made, the decisions others made, the external factors. Break it down until it is no longer a scary story you tell yourself in the dark, but a simple, factual report. Deconstruct it. Analyze it. See the levers and the gears. You will discover that the failure was not a verdict on your soul. It was a result of a specific set of inputs. If you want a different result, you must change the inputs. This is the beginning of reclaiming your power. You stop being the victim of your story and you become the analyst of your data. You think your business failed because you're a loser. That's a story. The data says it failed because of poor cash flow management, a flawed marketing strategy, and a competitor who outmaneuvered you. Those are not character flaws. Those are technical problems. They are solvable. They are learnable. The shame tells you that you are the problem. The analysis tells you that your strategy was the problem. You can change a strategy. Changing the core of who you are is much harder, and likely unnecessary. Kalen learned this with his hands, with his sweat. He learned that the rock of his failure was not unbreakable. It could be broken down into smaller, manageable pieces, and these smaller pieces were no longer terrifying. They were just stones, and stones are what you build with. "Tomorrow," Silas said, looking into the fire, "you will stop breaking the rocks. Tomorrow you will start building with them. You have cleared the site. You have deconstructed the rubble. Now we draw a new blueprint. But this blueprint will not be for a building of glass and steel. It will be for the fortress inside you. And the first line you will draw is the line between what you can control and what you cannot." This was the next stage. The first covenant was to embrace the rubble, to love the failure. The second was to forge an unbreakable mind from it. And that began with the most fundamental principle of Stoic philosophy, the one that, once truly understood, changes everything: the dichotomy of control. Imagine your life as a fortress. There is an inner citadel and there are the outer lands. Inside the citadel is everything you have absolute control over: your beliefs, your judgments, your decisions, your actions, your character. These are your citizens, your army, your kingdom. The outer lands are everything you do not have absolute control over: the economy, the weather, what other people think of you, your reputation, your health, your wealth. These things are not yours to command. You can influence them, you can prepare for them, but you cannot control them. The great mistake of modern life, the source of most of our anxiety and suffering, is that we spend our lives trying to build our fortress in the outer lands. We build our identity on our job title, our bank account, our social media following, the approval of others. We are trying to build a castle on a tectonic plate, and then we are shocked and devastated when the ground moves. Kalen had built the zenith, his entire sense of self, in the outer lands. His happiness was dependent on public acclaim. His sense of worth was tied to the success of a physical object subject to 1,000 variables beyond his control. When the ground shifted, when a rival firm acted, when public opinion turned, his entire fortress crumbled because it was never really his to begin with. "You are a terrible architect," Silas told him one morning as they stood on the cliff edge. The wind was howling, whipping sea spray into their faces. "You built the most important structure of your life, your own mind, on land you didn't own." Kaelan's instinct was to argue, but he had learned to listen. "Your work is external," Silas continued, his voice cutting through the wind. "The acclaim is external, the money is external, all of it can be taken from you in an instant. It was, but your response to it, your choice of how to perceive it, the character you build in the face of it, that is internal, that is your land, and you have neglected it. You left the gates of your inner citadel wide open, and so when the storm came, it washed right through you and turned your kingdom to mud." The second principle of the architect's covenant is this: draw a clear and ruthless line between what is yours and what is not, and then dedicate your entire life to building within your own walls. This is not about passivity. It is not about giving up on external goals. You can still strive to build great things, to earn money, to win acclaim, but you must do so with the understanding that the outcome is not truly in your control. The effort is. The process is. The character you display along the way is. That is where you must place your sense of self. The goal is not to win the game. The goal is to play the game with courage, with honor, with excellence. The final score is in the hands of fortune. Your performance is in your hands. A warrior is not defined by whether he wins or loses the battle, but by how he fights. Silas gave Kaelan a new task. He was to build a low stone wall along the cliff edge, protecting the small garden Silas had cultivated. The task was simple, but the lesson was profound. "There will be storms," Silas said. "The waves will crash against this wall, the wind will try to tear it down, some of its stones may be washed away. You cannot control the ocean. That is the outer land, but you can control how well you build the wall. You can choose the right stones. You can place them with care and precision. You can build it so that it is strong and resilient. Your job is not to defeat the ocean. Your job is to build a good wall." And so Kaelan built. He was no longer just a laborer breaking rocks. He was a craftsman again. He learned to read the stones, to see how they would fit together. He learned to build with the grain of the rock, not against it. He worked in the wind and the rain. He learned to ignore the weather, to focus only on the stone in his hand, on the small section of wall in front of him. His world shrank from the grand, global stage of architecture to a few feet of rough-hewn stone. And in that shrinking, he found a new kind of freedom. The anxiety that had plagued him for years began to recede. The constant, gnawing need for validation, the fear of judgment, the obsession with his legacy, it all began to feel distant, irrelevant. What mattered was the integrity of the wall. What mattered was the quality of his effort. One day, a violent storm rolled in, the worst of the season. For a full day, the ocean hammered the coast. Kalen and Silas stayed inside, the stone house barely trembling against the onslaught. Kalen was sure the wall would be destroyed. He had put weeks of his life into it, and he felt a familiar sickness in his stomach, the fear of his work being undone. When the storm passed, they went outside. A section of the wall, about 10 feet long, had been completely washed away. The waves had found a weak point and exploited it. Kalen's heart sank. It failed. No, Silas said calmly. It didn't fail, it gave us information. It showed us where the foundation was weak. It showed us where we need to build better. The storm is not the enemy, Kalen. The storm is the teacher. It is the quality inspector. It reveals the flaws in your design. He looked at Kalen. And what is your response? Will you curse the storm? Will you abandon the project? Or will you thank the storm for the lesson and then get to work building a stronger wall? This is the mindset of the unbreakable architect. You do not pray for calm seas. You pray for a better ship. And you understand that the only way to know if your ship is seaworthy is to sail it through a storm. Your setbacks, your critics, your failures, they are not punishments. They are stress tests. They are free data, showing you exactly where the cracks are in your inner citadel. Do you see the power in this shift of perspective? Someone insults you. The old response is to feel anger, shame, to defend your honor. You are building on their land, allowing their words to define your emotional state. The new response, the response of the architect, is to see their insult as a gust of wind. Does it shake your inner structure? If so, it has revealed a weakness. Perhaps you have too much ego invested in that area. Perhaps you seek the approval of people who do not matter. The insult is a gift. It has shown you where you need to reinforce your walls. You can thank them silently for the free lesson and then get back to your work. Your business venture fails. The old response is despair. I am a failure. The new response is analysis. The strategy was weak in this area. The market conditions shifted in a way I did not anticipate. The failure is a lesson in strategy, not a verdict on your soul. You thank the failure for the education, an education you could not have received in a classroom, and you begin to design a new, more robust strategy. This is not a trick of the mind. It is the fundamental realignment of your entire operational system. You stop being a leaf in the wind, blown about by the gusts of external events. You become a stone. The wind still blows, the storms still rage, but you are no longer moved. Your peace, your stability, your sense of self-worth are no longer contingent on the weather. They are generated from within. They are a product of your own sovereign kingdom. Kalen spent months rebuilding and reinforcing the wall. He learned to read the tides, to understand the currents, to see where the ocean's power was most focused. He didn't try to stop the ocean. He learned to build in harmony with it, to design a structure that could absorb and redirect its force, rather than just bluntly resist it. His work on the wall was a physical manifestation of his internal work. Every stone he placed was a new, stoic judgment he was laying in his own mind. Every gap he filled was an emotional vulnerability he was addressing. He was building his inner citadel, stone by stone, while the ocean, the chaos of the world, threw its worst at him. And he found that he was no longer afraid. The fear of failure, the fear that had secretly driven his ambition and ultimately caused his downfall, was gone. How can you fear failure when you have redefined it as feedback? How can you fear the storm when you have learned to see it as a teacher? You can't. You can only welcome it. You can stand on your wall, as the wind whips your face and the spray soaks your clothes, and you can smile because you know that this is what makes you stronger. This is how you know your work is sound. But this inner peace, this stoic calm, is not the final stage. It is the foundation. A foundation is not meant to be lived in. It is meant to be built upon. Silas knew that Kaelin had now cleared the rubble and laid the new foundation. He had embraced his failure, and he had learned to distinguish between what he could control and what he could not. Now, it was time to build the frame. It was time to forge the strength that would sit atop that foundation. The next stage of the covenant required moving beyond passive resilience and into the realm of active, intentional strengthening. It required a new principle. The mind, like a muscle, does not grow in comfort. It grows only when it is placed under intentional, intelligent stress. You cannot build an unbreakable mind by sitting in a comfortable room and thinking positive thoughts. You must go to the gym. And the gym for the soul is a place of voluntary hardship. "You have built a fine wall," Silas said one day as they surveyed Kaelin's work. The wall was now a formidable structure, a testament to months of labor. "You have learned to withstand the storms that life throws at you. But there is a difference between a mind that does not break and a mind that is powerful. A fortress can keep the enemy out, but a fortress does not win a war. To be powerful, you must not only withstand the world, you must impose your will upon it. And for that, you need more than just a strong foundation. You need forged steel." Silas explained that the modern world is an engine of comfort. It is designed to remove all friction, all discomfort, all hardship. Food is delivered to our door. The temperature is perfectly controlled. We can entertain ourselves for a lifetime without ever leaving the couch, and this relentless pursuit of comfort is making us dangerously weak. We are becoming like zoo animals, perfectly fed, perfectly safe, but utterly incapable of surviving in the wild. "When a real storm comes," Silas said, "when a real predator appears, a job loss, a betrayal, a sickness, we have no strength to fight back. We have no calluses on our minds. The slightest touch of real-world friction shatters us. This is why you collapsed. Your life was a series of successes. You had grown soft in the climate-controlled chamber of your own hype. The first real storm turned you to dust." The third principle of the architect's covenant is to actively and regularly seek out discomfort, to microdose hardship, to build calluses on your mind by doing things that are intentionally difficult, things that your weak, comfort-seeking self cries out against. This is not about self-punishment. It is about training. It is about inoculation. You expose yourself to small, controlled doses of a virus so that when the real plague comes, you are immune. What does this look like in practice? It is the cold shower in the morning. It is the workout you do even when you are tired. It is fasting for a day. It is sleeping on the floor for a night. It is having the difficult conversation you have been avoiding. It is deliberately choosing the harder path. Silas started Kaelin on a new regimen. The work on the wall continued, but it was now supplemented with new disciplines. They would rise before the sun and plunge into the freezing Atlantic Ocean. The shock of the cold was a primal scream for the body to retreat, to seek warmth, to survive. But the discipline was to breathe through it, to calm the panic, to show the body that the mind was in charge. "The cold is a teacher," Silas would shout over the crashing waves. "It teaches you the difference between pain and your reaction to pain. The pain of the cold is a simple, clean sensation. Your panic, your shivering, your desire to flee, that is the story you tell yourself about the pain. Learn to separate the two. Learn to feel the sensation without the story, and you will be free." After the ocean plunge, they would work. Hard, physical labor. But now, Silas introduced new rules. They would work for hours without speaking. The silence was a different kind of hardship. It forced Kaelin to be alone with his own thoughts, to confront the chatter and the anxiety in his own head without the distraction of conversation. He learned to find a stillness in the midst of the work, a meditative focus that was both calming and powerful. They ate simply. Often they would fast, consuming nothing but water for a full day. The hunger was another teacher. It taught Kalen that the desperate craving for food was, again, a story. The body was not actually starving. It had reserves. The panic was a relic of an ancient survival instinct, an instinct that was now, in a world of abundance, a source of weakness. By ignoring the false panic of hunger, he was training his willpower. He was teaching the most primal part of his brain, that is conscious. Disciplined mind was the master. Each of these practices was a rep in the mental gym. Each one was a small act of rebellion against the cult of comfort. Each one was forging a new neural pathway, a pathway of discipline over instinct, of courage over fear. Do you see how this applies to your life? Your alarm goes off. The comfort-seeking self, the inner bitch, as some call it, wants to hit snooze. It whispers sweet lies about needing more rest. Getting out of bed immediately without hesitation is a rep. It's a small victory, but it sets the tone for the day. You are telling your mind, from the first moment you are conscious, who is in charge. You have a choice between the elevator and the stairs. The comfort-seeking self wants the elevator. Taking the stairs is a rep. You are choosing a small, voluntary hardship. It is insignificant in the grand scheme of your health, but it is monumental in the training of your will. You have a project to work on. Your mind craves the easy dopamine hit of social media, of YouTube, of distraction. Forcing yourself to sit down and do the deep, difficult work for an hour without distraction is a rep, a powerful one. This is not about becoming an ascetic monk. It is about becoming a warrior. A warrior trains in times of peace so that he is ready for times of war. You must create your own training ground. You must become your own drill sergeant, because the world will not do it for you. The world wants you soft and compliant. It wants you to be a good little consumer, always seeking the next comfort, the next distraction. To build an unbreakable mind is a revolutionary act. It is an act of defiance against a culture that wants to sedate you. Kalen resisted at first. His body and mind, conditioned by years of comfort, screamed in protest. Why plunge into icy water when there was a warm house? Why fast when there was food? Why endure silence when conversation could pass the time? Because we are not building for today, Silas told him, his voice firm. We are not building for the calm sea and the sunny sky. We are building for the hurricane. We are building for the day when the world tries to break you. And on that day you will not have the luxury of choosing your hardship. It will be chosen for you. On that day you will need to call upon a strength you did not know you had. And the only way to have that strength then is to build it now, in these small, daily acts of voluntary suffering. A transformation was occurring in Kalen. It was more profound than the calluses on his hands or the new, hard lines of muscle on his frame. His presence changed. The nervous, haunted energy of the man who had arrived at Silas's door was gone. In its place was a quiet, solid stillness, a centeredness. He moved with a deliberation and a purpose that had been absent before. He had the calm, watchful eyes of a man who had faced his own demons and was no longer afraid of the dark. He had learned to welcome the shock of the cold water. He had learned to appreciate the clarity of mind that came with fasting. He had learned to find peace in the long, silent hours of work. He had stopped fighting the hardship and had started to see it as a tool, as the very chisel that was sculpting him into the man he wanted to be. He was no longer just the architect. He was the stonemason. He was the steel worker. He was the raw material and the craftsman all in one. He was building himself. One evening, after months of this grueling regimen, a small fishing boat appeared in the cove below. A man got out and made his way up the winding path to the house. He was a local fisherman who sometimes brought them supplies. This time, he brought a newspaper. It was weeks old, but to Kaelan and Silas, who lived almost completely cut off from the world, it was a message from another universe. The fisherman handed it to Silas and left. On the front page was a small article, a follow-up piece on the Zenith fiasco. Kaelan's heart gave a familiar, sickening lurch, a ghost of the old anxiety. Silas read it silently and then handed it to Kaelan. The article detailed how the now infamous building was being retrofitted at enormous cost. It mentioned Kaelan's name, calling him a disgraced wunderkind who had vanished from public life. And then it quoted his old rival, the one who had leaked the flaw, who was now being hailed as a hero for his vigilant oversight. He spoke of the importance of humility and caution in their profession, a clear, sanctimonious jab at Kaelan. A year ago, these words would have sent Kaelan into a spiral of rage and despair. He would have felt the injustice, the humiliation, the bitter sting of his rival's triumph. He braced himself for that feeling now. But it didn't come. He read the words and he felt nothing. A strange, profound calm. The words were just ink on paper. The opinions of men he did not respect were just sounds in the wind. Their games of reputation and legacy seemed small, pathetic, like children fighting over a sandcastle on the beach while the tide was coming in. He looked up from the paper, out at the vast, indifferent ocean. He looked at the stone wall he had built with his own hands. He felt the solid ground beneath his feet. He felt the quiet strength in his own body, a strength forged in cold water and hard labor. "It doesn't matter," Kaelan said, and the sound of his own voice surprised him with its steadiness. "What they write, what they say, it doesn't matter." Silas smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "Good," he said. "The foundation is set, the frame is forged, now it is time for the covenant." The work was done. Not the work of building walls or breaking rocks, but the work of unbuilding and rebuilding a man. Kaelan had arrived as a ruin, a pile of shattered ego and brittle pride. He had been deconstructed, piece by painful piece. The rubble of his failure had been accepted, embraced, and then used to lay a new foundation of stoic resilience. The frame of his character had been forged in the fires of voluntary hardship. He was no longer a hollow structure, beautiful on the outside but empty within. He was a fortress, built from the inside out. The architect's covenant was not a destination. It was a new way of being. It was a promise, a vow to himself to live by the new blueprint he had discovered. The first vow of the covenant: "I will own my failures. They are not my shame, they are my material. I will not hide the cracks, I will fill them with gold. What stands in the way becomes the way." The second vow: "I will build my house on my own land. My focus, my energy, my identity will be placed only on what I can control. My thoughts, my actions, my character. The opinions of others, the outcomes of my efforts, the storms of fortune, these are the weather. I will learn from them, I will prepare for them, but I will not be ruled by them. My peace comes from within." The third vow: "I will seek out the fire. I will not worship comfort. I will embrace voluntary hardship as my greatest tool for growth. I will become the warrior who trains in peace for the inevitable war. I will build calluses on my mind so that when the world tries to hurt me, it will break its hand on my soul." This was the covenant, simple, powerful, unbreakable. "It is time for you to leave," Silas said one morning. "There is nothing more I can teach you. The only way to know if a design is sound is to subject it to the pressures of the real world." Kaelan felt a pang of fear, not of failure, but of leaving this sanctuary, this place where he had been reborn. But he knew Silas was right. A fortress is not meant to be hidden away on a cliff. It is meant to stand on the frontier, to face the enemy. He did not go back to the world of sleek glass towers and fawning critics. That world no longer held any appeal. He had no desire to reclaim his old name or chase his old ghosts. He had a new purpose. He moved to a city that had been ravaged by a recent earthquake, a place of genuine ruins, of shattered communities and broken lives. He did not arrive as Kaelan, the disgraced star architect. He arrived as a man with calloused hands and a quiet resolve. He started a small company, not to build monuments to his own ego, but to design and build safe, affordable, resilient housing for people who had lost everything. His work was different now. It was humble. It was grounded. He used local materials, simple designs that were both beautiful and strong. He worked alongside his crews, his hands in the concrete, his eyes on the details. He wasn't building for magazines or awards. He was building for people. He was building structures that could withstand the chaos of the world, because he himself was now a structure that could withstand the chaos of the world. His old rival heard of his new life and scoffed. He called it a penance, a pathetic attempt by a fallen man to find redemption. Some of his old colleagues pitied him, seeing his new life as a tragic waste of his genius. They did not understand. They could not understand. They were still playing the old game, the game of status and reputation. Kaelan was playing a different game now, an infinite game, the game of becoming. Years passed. Kaelan's company grew not into a corporate giant but into a force for good, respected for its integrity and the quality of its work. He never became famous again in the way he once was. His name was not whispered in the halls of power, but in the communities he helped to rebuild, his name meant something more. It meant strength. It meant resilience. It meant hope. One day, a young, ambitious journalist tracked him down. She wanted to write a story, a where is he now piece about the brilliant architect who had lost it all. She found him on a construction site, covered in dust, laughing with his workers. He looked older, his face weathered by the sun, but his eyes were clear and calm. She asked him about the zenith, about his fall from grace, about his regrets. Kaelan looked at her, and then he looked at the simple, sturdy building they were raising. He thought of Sela's. He thought of the cold ocean, the heavy hammer, the stone wall. He thought of the covenant he had made with himself in the ruins of his former life. He smiled. Regret? I have no regrets. The failure of that building was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. It was the demolition that had to happen. I was building with the wrong materials on the wrong foundation. That failure wasn't my ruin. It was my groundbreaking. The journalist was confused. She was looking for a story of tragedy and redemption. She found a man who was not redeemed because he did not believe he had ever been condemned. He had simply been given a new set of materials to build with. And this is the final, most powerful truth of the architect's covenant. The world will hand you failures. It will give you betrayals, losses, humiliations. It will provide you with an endless supply of rubble. You can spend your life complaining about the quality of the stones, or you can get to work. You can pick up the jagged pieces of your own life and decide, right now, to build something with them. Something that matters. Something that lasts. You can make a covenant with yourself. Embrace your failures as the cornerstone of your strength. Build your identity only on the land you own, your mind, your character, your actions. Seek out voluntary hardship as the forge of your will. This is not a motivational speech. This is a blueprint. It is a practical, actionable plan for building an unbreakable mind from the ruins of your own failures. The life you want, the strength you admire, the peace you crave, it is not found in success. It is forged in the skillful response to failure. Look at your life right now. Where are your ruins? What is the failure that you have allowed to define you? Stop seeing it as a tombstone. See it as a quarry. It is filled with the raw material you need to become the person you were meant to be. The world tried to bury you. It did not know that you were a seed. The journey is not easy. It will require you to declare war on your own weakness. It will demand that you walk toward the fire, not away from it. But the alternative is to remain a victim of your own story, a ghost haunting the ruins of your past. The choice is yours. The hammer is in your hands. The blueprint is before you. Will you curse the rubble, or will you start to build? Join us on this journey. Subscribe to MidQuest Chronicles and become part of a community of architects, all of us building our unbreakable minds stone by stone. This is not just about watching videos. It's about a shared covenant. Let us know in the comments below, what is the first stone you will build with? What failure will you transform from a source of shame into a source of strength? Your story is not over. The ground has just been cleared. It is time to begin.